On September the 7th, 1533, the child who would one day become Elizabeth I came screaming into the world. At the time, no one could have guessed that this tiny baby girl, the wrong sex in her father's eyes, would go on to become England's Gloriana. But to understand her birth, we have to step back a year earlier to Anne Boleyn's triumphs, anxieties, and her carefully staged confinement. Hey friend, welcome back to the channel. Today is another short-ish video. There's a lot going on with planning TudorCon and back to school and all of that. So for the next little bit, I'm probably going to do shorter videos and more just audio because it's faster. So thank you so much for bearing with me. This is always a crazy time of year. I love it. I love autumn. I love planning for TudorCon. I love TudorCon, all of it, but it is a little bit nutty. Anyway, today we are going to talk about the birth of Elizabeth, but also Anne's confinement and the period leading up to the birth. Of course, yesterday was September the 7th. That was the birthday of Elizabeth. So we are going to dig in and talk about the experience Anne had leading up to the birth of Elizabeth. So Anne had, of course, as we all know, held Henry off for years, keeping herself from becoming yet another discarded mistress. All of the signs point to her finally giving in on the famous trip to Calais in the autumn of 1532, when she was treated like a queen beside Henry as he met Francis I. Soon after, word spread that Anne was pregnant. By January 1533, she was already boasting of cravings, apples in particular, and Henry confidently told courtiers that this was a sign of pregnancy. Events moved quickly. Henry's new Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was prepared to declare the marriage to Catherine of Aragon invalid, and by that spring, the way was clear for Anne to be publicly acknowledged as queen. In June, Anne was now 6 months pregnant, and she was crowned in one of the most magnificent ceremonies that Tudor England had ever seen. This went beyond normal pageantry because the coronation was meant to ensure that there was no doubt about the legitimacy of the child that she carried. The baby had to be born to a consecrated queen. For a while, Anne's health was steady, but later in the pregnancy, things seemed a bit more difficult. Eric Ives noted that Henry was worried enough to cancel his usual summer progress and stay at Windsor so that Anne could rest. Some reported that he even prayed that she might miscarry if it meant saving her life. That's in Eric Ives's biography of Anne. At the same time, rumors began to swirl that Henry had taken a mistress. Now, Anne, who had once believed that Henry's devotion would be different for her than it had been for Catherine, now realized just how dangerous her position was. Chapuis, who was the ever-watchful imperial ambassador, recorded Henry's sharp rebuke when Anne confronted him. She should close her eyes like other queens had before her, and remember that he could humble her more quickly than he had exalted her. On August 26th, Anne entered her lying-in chamber at Greenwich Palace. The tradition of royal confinement was steeped in ritual. Windows were shuttered, the chamber hung with rich tapestries showing scenes of fertility, and only women were allowed inside. Relics and a baptismal font were kept ready in case the baby was sickly and needed immediate baptism. Anne's confinement followed rules laid down decades earlier by Lady Margaret Beaufort, Henry's formidable grandmother. It was a deeply feminine, almost sacred space where the queen waited in seclusion for labor to begin. Now, Henry had made plans for the triumphant arrival of his long-awaited son. He had had tournaments and jousts planned, and the names Henry or Edward ready to go. Instead, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, September 7th, Anne delivered a healthy baby girl. Henry canceled the jousts immediately, but he had also done that when Mary was born in 1516, so the reaction wasn't completely unprecedented. The official announcement was carefully phrased. God had granted the king and queen good speed in the deliverance and bringing forth of a princess. Of course, in the original announcements, it had said a prince, and they had to add an extra S to make it a princess. And you can still see some of the original announcements that have that S kind of put in. It looks very crowded because it was very crowded. A Te Deum was sung at St. Paul's, bonfires were lit, and wine flowed in London's streets. Outwardly, Henry and Anne seemed content. Elizabeth was legitimate, healthy, and proof that Anne could bear children. In private, though, both must have felt the sharp sting of disappointment. Anne even considered naming her daughter Mary just to rub salt in the wound for Catherine and her teenage daughter, Princess Mary. Ultimately, Henry decided on Elizabeth after his own mother, Elizabeth of York, the woman who had united the houses of York and Lancaster. 3 days later, Elizabeth's christening was staged at the Church of the Observant Friars at Greenwich. Hall's Chronicle gives us a detailed description of a dazzling procession of London's mayor, aldermen, nobles, and clergy. The baby was carried in a mantle of purple velvet lined with ermine, a canopy held over her head, trumpets sounding, and hundreds of torches lighting the way. The font was silver, the church hung with tapestries, gifts piled high. Godparents were carefully chosen: Cranmer, the Duchess of Norfolk, the Marchioness of Dorset, and, awkwardly, the Marchioness of Exeter, who was Catherine of Aragon's close friend, who clearly would have preferred to have not been there. Her presence was a calculated humiliation. For Anne, this wasn't just a baptism. This was a display of Howard Boleyn power. Out of 21 leading participants, 8 were her Howard relatives, alongside her father and her brother. Cromwell, who had orchestrated the coronation, oversaw the spectacle here as well. For a brief time, Anne looked triumphant. She was queen, she had delivered a healthy child, and Elizabeth had been baptized with all of the pomp due to a royal heir. To many in England, that should have been enough, but in the politics of the 16th century, a daughter was not a son. Elizabeth's birth had not solved the problem of the succession. Princess Mary, though now declared illegitimate, still had strong support at home and abroad, especially Catholic Europe. A single son would have silenced nearly every critic, but Anne had given Henry another daughter. As Eric Ives put it, while Anne was pregnant, she represented the hope for a son for England. With the birth of Elizabeth, that hope turned to disappointment. Her position on the throne was still insecure, her enemies still determined, and the wider world still skeptical. Yet, of course, history always has its own sense of irony. The baby carried into the Observant Friars beneath the crimson canopy was destined to outshine every expectation, becoming one of England's greatest rulers. But in September 1533, she was simply the wrong baby born to a queen whose time was already ticking down. So there you go, my friend, a little bit on the birth, the confinement of Anne, and the reaction. Thank you so much for watching and for being here. Of course, if you enjoyed this, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. And I hope I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out content like this on the regular. Thanks so much for being here, my friend. Remember, you are deeply loved. I am so glad I share the planet with you. You make the planet a better place. I'll be back very soon. Have an amazing day.